So we're here today at the 18th annual conference that the IOD have run on women and leadership. And I'm delighted today to be talking with Baroness Helena Morrissey. Helena, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here.
Could you just maybe explain, for those who don't know you, a bit about yourself?
I've worked nearly 4 decades in the city, CEO for 15 of them, fund manager for another 15. These days I chair a number of financial services companies and sit on a number of boards, and I founded the 30% Club.
What is the 30% Club?
So the 30% Club was set up 15 years ago, almost to the day, and it's a voluntary initiative, initially to try to improve the proportion of women on UK company boards, now in 20 countries, and we are at 40% women on UK company boards, up from less than 10% when we started. But it's all about voluntary action, and it's led by men and women working together. 30% Club now is seen as a tremendous success. You know, we have over 40% women on UK boards, up from less than 10% when we started. It's now, more importantly, it's now seen as just the norm. But at the start of all of this, I mean, there were a lot of people who felt very strongly, almost bizarrely so, that this was a terrible thing. But to be honest, John, that gives me confidence and hope that bigger, broader change is possible, because it now seems so obvious, and people say, well, that was the easy thing. You know, what about female CEOs? Or what about ethnic minority people? What about this? What about that? I think it's all possible. And 30% Club showed me that anything is possible. You have to get the timing right, and we had definitely luck on our side on that. And I think we got the right formula, even if it wasn't always through judgment. There was a bit of, you know, good fortune involved as well.
So what motivated you to set up the 30% Club?
So I was passed over for my first promotion. I'd just come back from maternity leave. I wasn't doing anything differently, really. And I asked my boss what I needed to do to get it next time. And he just looked me straight in the eye and said, nothing wrong with your performance, Helena, but there is some doubt over your commitment with a baby. I was shocked, but I planted that in my mind. I thought, if ever I have the opportunity and the power to do something to prevent that happening to other women, I will take it. One thing that I have to stress is at the time I really needed to work. My husband and I were both very junior in our careers. We had a baby. Mortgage rates were double digit in the UK. It was a painful time financially. And actually I look back on that, and some people say, well, that's very unfortunate. But actually, of course, it made you very determined to overcome that. But I did learn a lot. I sort of thought afterwards, so what did I do wrong? Or what could I do differently to prevent that happening again? And what I realized was that I had made assumptions about how people were perceiving me. I thought that my hard work and the actual work, you know, would stand for itself. I was like the archetypal girl sitting in the corner, head down, working every hour and expecting someone to notice and tap me on the shoulder and give me a pay rise and a promotion. And I realized that you need to strategize more. You need to, you know, have mentors. You need to befriend people who are in a position of power to give you the next opportunity or to help you have that opportunity. So I learned to strategize and ask for a seat at the table if I wasn't given one.
And we talk about failure makes you stronger. How did you kind of address that at that time? What did you actually go out and do? Or what did you change yourself or attitude?
You know, I did feel, you know, that I had failed. I now understand that failure is extremely important in life and in careers. It's not easy. In my experience, quite a lot of people do quit. You can pick yourself up, or with help, pick yourself up. I've definitely learned more from my setbacks than my successes. And
so as a business leader, as someone who's employing people, what's your thinking about the medium to long-term position of diversity and inclusion? Are we done? Are we over? Have we got to the place that we want to be for women on boards?
So I think on women on boards, I think we are done. I think there was a time and a place to focus on that. And although I'm not complacent, we always have to watch out for going backwards, I feel that it's just accepted as the norm now to have at least 30%, 40% women on boards. We clearly have a long way to go in other dimensions of diversity, but also female CEOs. Still, there's 9 out of the FTSE, which is obviously 9%. And we never seem to be able to get much above the 10% level. And I think that is still a bit of a concern, because it means that a couple of things, perhaps that a role is something that women don't aspire to for a number of reasons, and perhaps we need to rethink what that role looks like. And it means that we have this very macho sort of sense of what it is to be to have life at the top, you know, in a business context still. And again, that becomes a bit self-fulfilling. So obviously there's a huge ruckus in the whole world of DEI at the moment with President Trump's executive orders, which I must stress are now under legal challenge and the whole thing's being put on hold. But it's obviously shaken people. There's been some element of skepticism ever since the whole movement started. It has never been fully accepted by everybody, and too many people have seen it as a zero-sum game, not growing the pie. Secondly, I think that the DEI movement, if we can call it that, has to take some share of the blame, that we've left ourselves, given ammunition to people who are anti this. And perhaps sometimes initiatives have, perhaps inadvertently, but they've been about virtue signalling, or they haven't favoured merit over identity, or just one viewpoint's been allowed. Sometimes I think people have ironically felt very excluded by diversity, equity and inclusive efforts. However, I don't think people need to worry about following the US too much. We have agency. America doesn't set the whole world's agenda, and we obviously have very different political agenda, for example, in the UK. And I would really want to encourage anybody involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion to take a step back and ensure that everything that we're doing is consistent with those values, not just having that name on the door, and genuinely inclusive and genuinely helping the best talent have the best choice or opportunity, and that we're creating the best teams. And to take heed of this as a moment where we have to ensure that everything stacks up, that it's not just done for the sake of it. So I was very ambitious always and wanted to win hearts and minds. And in the UK, of course, we have a very voluntary corporate governance code. And I knew people would quite resent it, I think, if they were told they had to have a certain number of women. I wanted them to want the women because they were great, because I felt it would enhance the boardroom. So Norway is an interesting example because they famously introduced a quota of at least 40% of either gender on boards, and they introduced it almost overnight. So what happened was that many of the women in executive roles downed tools and went off to be non-execs. And of course, that meant that it was not sustainable. So a few years into that, people from Norway contacted me and said, we'd like to have a 30% club here. And I was like, why? Because you have a quota. They said, because all the women have gone off to do these roles and we don't have a pipeline. And I think ultimately we've proved that you don't need quotas because we don't have quotas in many countries now, and we've achieved at least 30%, getting on to 40% in several countries. And I think it's more powerful to do it through a voluntary action.
So what is the role of the non-exec in terms of pushing through diversity, pushing through change, and pushing the boundaries merely into the future?
So it's absolutely critical, and I would like to encourage any non-execs watching this to think this is your job and your responsibility, because you can ask the questions that sometimes people who are working within the business might not even think to ask or spot that need asking. So actually this morning I was on a virtual call with a board that I'm a non-exec on, and we were talking about the staff survey and some of the cultural aspects that were coming from that and what we needed to do about it. And that's the thing I would encourage, ask the next question. Don't just look at the data, oh, we've got 30% women in this level, but look behind it and look particularly at staff surveys and ask for questions to be put on those surveys you want to see, so you can assess conduct, psychological safety, all the things that are preconditions to having more diversity. And I would really want to encourage anybody involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion to take a step back and ensure that everything that we're doing is consistent with those values, not just having that name on the door, and genuinely inclusive and genuinely helping the best talent have the best choice or opportunity.
So I'm interested in how you feel that the business of today goes after talent.
So I think this is one where the intergenerational divide that we have today comes into the fore, because I think inevitably a lot of people doing the hiring are older, they've got more experience, but in a different world when we didn't have technology, before we all were working from home at least part of the time, or many of us. And I think it's quite hard to, in our own little bubble, to work out what are the ways to motivate and encourage the best talent to apply and to join and to stay and progress in our firms. So I do think in this context, we really need to involve younger people that already work for us perhaps, or young people in our lives, in terms of how we attract the best talent, the kind of things that they're looking for. And I think it's understandable they expect things to be different when they've grown up with technology and we didn't have that, or I didn't have that growing up. They do want to know about values, they do want to know that there is equality, they do want to see a future for themselves, but they're not quite as wedded to a single company when they start out They are much more wedded to their networks, and they see themselves a bit more of a sort of self-contained, self-employable unit, often at least. So companies just need to be aware of that.
So what advice would you give to young women who might aspire to run companies?
So my daughters, I have 6 of them, are very tired of me saying to them, leap before you look. I know that's the opposite of what the saying says, but I see lots of women looking and looking and looking and never leaping. And yet, when you leap and try something, so often it goes right. We worry about what goes wrong. So please, leap before you look. What's the worst that can happen? It doesn't quite work out. You pick yourself up, you try again.
It's really important getting younger people into the boardroom, encouraging young directors to be the best directors they can be. How are we going to encourage the next generation of directors to drive growth and to move the UK economy and indeed the global economy forward?
Clearly, we need to encourage innovation and confidence in our potential. Sadly, at the moment, I feel there's a lot of pessimism around. So one thing I would like to stress today is I think we have a lot of determination about our own future. And so sometimes when the world seems to be caving in on you, you need to focus on what's within your own orbit and what you can do to change what's happening in your own world, in your own company, and your own life. So I would encourage people to think quite small sometimes, but think ambitiously about what they can do within their own place rather than try to fix everything in the whole universe, because that's very overwhelming and a bit dispiriting for many people.
Baroness Helena Morrissey, thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, John.